So this talk is one of the very first talks that I ever gave, Reaching the Reluctant Writer. And I think for many of you, you may be mostly familiar or very familiar with the basic idea of our Unit 1-2 style of keyword outline and writing it out. So I beg your indulgence in case this is all review. But I do know, especially for teachers, there is often a need to explain what you're doing and why you're doing it to parents for whom it may be a new idea. So if you're in that category, perhaps you would take notes or think in terms of, oh, I know all this, but here's maybe an added little bit of information that I could use to explain to, my students or parents why we're doing this. So usually, if people come to a talk called Reaching the Reluctant Writer, they are here because they either have or possibly are themselves a reluctant writer. And I do think that teaching writing is perhaps one of the more difficult things to teach in the world of education for a couple reasons. The first reason is there seems to be a great aptitude difference on the extremes with children. On one end of a spectrum, you have a child, often a girl, but not always. She can whip out a spiral notebook and start writing and go on page after page after page, and you read it, and it goes on page after page after page, and you're not quite sure how to help her organize this great spewing of words and ideas onto paper, but whew, can she write? And you don't want to stifle that aptitude. On the other end of a spectrum, you have a child who, often a boy, not always, would rather scrub all the toilets in the building twice than put one entire paragraph on paper because it is so painful, it is so overwhelming, it is so impossible that that child would prefer any other form of torture than that. And of course, that's a spectrum. Those are extremes. Most children are somewhere in the middle there. But I do think it makes it difficult for us when we go to teach writing because some ideas that we find that may work and help one type of child don't necessarily work with the other types of children. And so there's that problem of aptitude difference. We also find curricular options, kind of on a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum would be, the language arts workbook. It comes in the grade 3 flavor, the grade 4 flavor, the grade 5 flavor, and it has page after page of little things that are supposed to help improve writing, identify all the prepositions in this paragraph, join these two sentences with a conjunction, and it has a lot of grammar, vernacular manipulation type of stuff, but then when it comes to composition, it may not give a lot of help. I've actually seen one of the grade 3 flavor that had these instructions. Write a paragraph about your best friend. Be sure to include 3 details. Okay, so kid writes, my best friend is named Johnny and he is really cool and fun to play with. Period. I'm done. That's not a paragraph. I included 3 details. Well, but it's not a paragraph. What's a paragraph? Longer. So you get kind of in this feeling about that. On the other end of the spectrum are kind of the creative writing idea books, right? And these usually you find them in stores with educational supplies and you pull one off and it has all sorts of suggestions, writing prompts, right? So, pretend you are a newspaper reporter and report about something that happened in your life recently. And then the child is supposed to kind of fantasize that he is a newspaper reporter, while accomplishing the goal of this book, which is to help the kid think of something to write about. Because that very often is the defining problem, is it not? If you meet a child who does not like to write, and you ask them, why do you not like this? After you get past the tautologies of because it's hard, because I hate it, and once you get to some substantive comment, it usually is, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to write. I can't think of anything. Has anyone heard that come out of kids' mouth? I can't think of anything. Well, I mean, this shouldn't surprise us terribly because they're just little kids and they live in the moment, and you're trying to force them to kind of go outside and be objective in a way that maybe isn't natural to their condition at 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. But it does make kind of a problem. So how do we overcome this kind of defining challenge when it comes to getting kids to write? So what we have come to understand is that you don't have to think of what to write in order to learn something about how to write. And so a lot of writing programs kind of start there. You have to think up all the content in order to learn about writing. And then the kids are kind of stuck at that spot. I don't know what to think. I can't think. I don't know what I should say. Whereas what we have discovered is if you reverse the process and say, no, you don't have to think of something. We will give you something to think. We'll give you content. Then you can learn, something about writing using ideas that you didn't have to produce. That works so much better, and it overcomes that problem of I don't know what to do, and I'm frustrated, and I hate this. So, what I'm going to take you through today is the first couple steps of our whole process, which we call Teaching Writing with Structure and Style. So that's our course, Teaching Writing, Structure, and Style, and this is the first couple little steps, and you don't have to buy anything to do this. You can learn this right now and go home and try it tomorrow morning if you want to. It's very easy to do. And so what we do is we begin with a short source text. This is generally a paragraph length, and I will tell you that if you have a reluctant writer, short is good, right? In fact, I would argue that for most people, more frequent, shorter assignments are better. Why? Well, what do children like the most about schoolwork? Being finished. That's what they like. So if you do more frequent, shorter things, they get to be finished more often. Therefore, they are happier. So, something that's short, it should be at or preferably below the reading level of the student. So we want to start with something that is at or below reading level so that it is approachable and relatively easy, doesn't have too many unfamiliar words or unfamiliar ideas or too long of sentences. So, relatively short and at or below the reading level. I personally like using Aesop fables a lot. Aesop fables are generally short. They are free. You can go to aesopfables.com and there's, I think, 160 some of them. Aesop fables often come in various levels of vocabulary. You can get ones that sound a little old and antiquated and may have better, more interesting vocabulary perhaps for older kids, or you can get them written in a simpler form, or you can rewrite them yourself if you need to. But they're free, readily available, you can print them out, and nobody objects to Aesop fables. Like it's not beneath anyone. You can use them with, 7-year-olds, you could use them with 16-year-olds. Nobody complains. In fact, we are going to use an Aesop fable today with the demonstration of how to do this. But you're not limited to Aesop fables. You can use really anything that a child can read. Interesting information, perhaps about an animal. Children like animals, so we do a lot with animals, people, places, events, really, anything. So it can be kind of a story like a fable. It could also be more encyclopedic, and that's fine. It doesn't really matter as long as it is at or below the reading level and short. The second thing we will do is teach them how to create what we call a key word outline. Some of you, I think, are familiar with this idea. Some of you may be very familiar with this idea. But it is an excellent way to introduce anyone to this idea of using a source text and then representing information from a source text. And so the keyword outline we will structure in the beginning here, and this is unit 1 of our whole system, is to have a sentence and choose a maximum of 3 words per sentence. And if you have a short source text, 4, 5, 6, 7, some sentences long, it should go pretty quickly. Once you have created the keyword outline, then the next step is to verbally test the outline. So then we'll have the children look at their keyword outline and try to verbally reconstruct the ideas from each of the sentences in the short source text. And this is important to understand, not a test of the child or a test of the student's memory. This is the student testing the outline that they created. And if they can make sense of the outline, then it's working great. If they look at it and say, oh, I don't quite remember why I wrote that word or those keywords, then you can go back, read the original again, maybe change the outline, and continue in the process. So very important for you as teachers to understand this is not a test of the child, and we don't want the child to feel as though they are being tested. It's the student testing the outline to be sure it works. The next thing would be to write from the keyword outline a summary or retelling of that content. It's not really a summary so much in that you are choosing some of it but not all of it. You're using every line of keywords from each sentence in the original, but you may be telling it in a slightly different or shorter way. But it basically is the first step in our process of writing on paper. Now, this is not a particularly new idea. It may be new to a lot of people today who came through schools that did something different, but it's actually a very, very old idea. It goes all the way back to actually the ancient rhetoric exercises, which some of you may have heard, called the progymnasmata, or progymnasmata, however you pronounce your Greek, which were exercises for the training of rhetoric. And the very first step in this series of exercises that goes all the way back 2,000 years was to retell a fable. So it's not a new idea to retell an existing idea. It just may be new to some people today. And then you can read various accounts through history of people kind of doing this or rediscovering it. Probably the best example is from the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. And we'll read a little excerpt of this right here so you can see how he did this. When my father happened to find my papers, he took occasion to talk to me about the manner of my writing, observed that although I had the advantage of my antagonists in correct spelling and pointing, which I owed to the printing house, I fell far short in elegance of expression, in method, and in perspicuity, of which he convinced me by several instances. I saw the justice of his remarks, and thence grew more attentive to the manner in writing, and determined to endeavor at improvement. Wouldn't it be great if all children had this attitude? Although I'm not sure how old Franklin was when this happened. I would guess he was a little older than the typical elementary age student who might not have that attitude. I actually printed this thing out and put it on the wall in my home once, just like, here's a hint, right? You could be more attentive to the manner of writing and ask me for help. Moving on. About this time, I met with an odd volume of The Spectator. It was the third. I had never before seen any of them. I bought it, read it over and over, and was much delighted with it. I thought the writing excellent and wished, if possible, to imitate it. With that view, I took some of the papers and, making short hints of the sentiment in each sentence, laid them by a few days, and then, without looking at the book, tried to complete the papers again by expressing each hinted sentiment at length and as fully as it had been expressed before in any suitable words that should come to hand. Well, that's exactly what I just described to you. He had the original, he made the short hints or took the key words, and then he put the original away, and then he tried to reconstruct those ideas from his notes. So Franklin somehow must have known, he intuited or was aware that if he wanted to get better at something, he needed something better than what he could do to imitate. And this is true in anything, whether it's sports or music or writing or art. If you just do what you can do, and continue to do what you can do, you will be able to do what you can do, but you will only be able to do what you can do because you're only doing what you can do. Did you follow that? However, if there's a coach, a model, an example, something that's better than what you can do, you can strive for that, and by imitating that, you can do better than what you could do without the model. And this is true in anything, any skill you're trying to develop. Improvement requires imitation of a model that is better than what you can do on your own, right? And Franklin somehow kind of understood this. He intuited this. Then I compared my Spectator with the original, discovered some of my faults, and corrected them. But I found I wanted a stock of words or a readiness in recollecting and using them, which I thought I should have acquired before that time, since the continual occasion for words of the same import but of different length to suit the measure, of different sound for the rhyme, would have laid me under a constant necessity of searching for variety, and also have tended to fix that variety in my mind and make me master of it. Now, I think he wrote this before we had started talking about run-on sentences, because that's a kind of a long sentence, but if you slog through it a couple times, basically what he's saying here is, as I was writing this from my notes, I realized I didn't have the sufficient vocabulary or range of expression to do justice to the original idea. I think what he's actually saying is I sure could have used a thesaurus of the English language, which had not yet been invented. And I think Franklin would very much approve of the way we do things in our system, giving the kids nice long lists of words and substitutes for other words and different grammatical constructions and variety, ways to do things with words, because that's what he was noting, that he needed. He was constantly searching for variety. And we know that in writing, as well as pretty much anything else, variety is a key to engaging the reader and making it more appealing. I also sometimes jumbled my collections of hints into confusion, and after some weeks endeavored to reduce them into the best order before I began to form the full sentences and complete the paper. That's weird. What did he just say? He had his notes. He intentionally mixed them all up. Why would anyone do that? So impractical. Well, the next sentence answers it. This was to teach me method in the arrangement of thoughts. Kind of like training himself on what we might have to do if we were researching something and we got information from here and there and another place, and we had all this information, and now we have to figure out, well, what should go first, what should go after that, what should fit in, how's that connected? He was imitating not just the content, but also trying to understand the logic behind the sequencing of the ideas in the original. Now, from here, it gets very important for us, especially if we have reluctant writers. By comparing my work afterward with the original, I discovered many faults and amended them. But I sometimes had the pleasure of fancying that in certain particulars of small import, I had been lucky enough to improve the method or the language, and this encouraged me to think I might possibly in time come to be a tolerable English writer, of which I was extremely ambitious. Now, that is the most important thing, because it holds in it the key to motivation. Read it again. I sometimes had the pleasure of fancying that in certain particulars of small import, I had been lucky enough to improve the method or the language, And this encouraged me. I have found this to be 100% consistently true with kids. You know, I used to travel around a lot and teach writing classes, mostly to homeschool kids, sometimes in schools. But, you know, I'd be there and people walking in the room, and I would spot a kid coming in, and you know he's been crying in the car because he's got raccoon eyes to prove it, and mom's behind him, maybe with a knife. You're going in there, you know. And he sits down, and like this idea of a 2-hour writing class is as close to real purgatory as he's ever got so far. And he's dreading it. And then that same kid, 2 hours later, walk out and say stuff like, that was fun. Is he coming back? Can I do that again? Why? My excellent jokes? I don't think so. They are good jokes, but not that powerful. What happened was he had that experience. He might have walked out of there with a version of the hare and the tortoise almost exactly like the one I started with, except maybe he put in that cool ly word that he picked off a list. Or maybe he said, oh, we'll change the judge from the fox into the cheetah. That way no one will get caught cheating. Or some funny little certain particular of small import that he believed made his thing a little bit better or more interesting or more his own. And so this really is the key to motivation, is that feeling that I have improved something slightly, and then you want to do it again and again. Well, let's try one ourselves. You have the handout here, and it has this Aesop fable. I would suspect most of you are familiar with this Aesop fable, having probably grown up with some Aesop fables at least. So I recommend that you would read it through with the students first, just to double check that they understand all the words and have a good sense of the whole before jumping into the keyword process. So we'll just read it through once. I have chosen this Aesop fable because I believe it to be at or most likely below your reading level. So, by an unlucky chance, a fox fell into a deep well from which there was no escape. A goat passed by and asked the fox, "What are you doing down there?" "Oh, have you not heard?" said the fox. "There is going to be a great drought. So I came down here in order to be sure to have water by me." "Why don't you come down too?" The goat thought this a good idea and jumped into the well. The fox immediately sprang onto the goat's back, and by putting a foot on the goat's long horns, managed to hop up to the edge of the well. "Remember," said the fox, "be careful of the advice of one who is in trouble." Okay, so there's many different versions, I'm sure, of that floating around in the world of Aesop fables, translations and rewrites and retells. This one, the way it's formatted is kind of all in one block, and the dialogue is not offset by indentations the way you would sometimes see that, just so we can actually fit it on the paper more easily and on the screen. Now, the next step, once we've talked it through, and I don't think there's any unfamiliar things there for you, but if there were with children, I might talk about a drought. Maybe they don't know that word. I was actually listening to a book just recently that was written about 100 years ago, and it used the word draft for drought. And I thought, oh, a draft. I've never heard that used in that way. So I don't know why the reader did it that way, if that's the way they used to pronounce it. But, little opportunities to teach vocabulary anytime I find them are good. It's also a weirdly spelled word, so you can point that out. Draft. And then you could talk a little bit about, the nature of foxes, as I mentioned early today, to be crafty and cruel and mean and heartless. Anyway. All right, so now the next step would be to create a little bit of a keyword outline here. And so you see next to on the piece of paper, a place for you to copy this onto your page. So I would encourage you to do that. Right up at the top, there's a space for the title, and you probably want to go ahead and put the title, or you could just put keywords of the title, fox and goat, whatever works. However, when you are working with children, I recommend that you don't have the source text and the space for the outline on the same page, so much so as use a different piece of paper. So that way you can, at some point, remove the original text and have just the piece of paper with the keyword outline. Although if it's on the same page, that's not a big deal. You can kind of just cover up or ignore. But this is formatted for your convenience, not in the way that I would give it to students. All right, so now we look at this first sentence and we would say, okay, let's go back and read it again. By an unlucky chance, a fox fell into a deep well from which there was no escape. What would you consider to be key words in that sentence? Words that would help you remember the basic idea of that sentence. A shout out. Fox. Fell. Well. Now we could use fox, but it's part of the title, so it's kind of a freebie. So we're not necessarily going to forget that it was a fox. So we've got fell well. We could have one more because we're limited to 3. No escape. Escape and no escape. And so we could cross out the escape or put the no sign over it or something like that. All right, so that's what we would do. And with young children or children who may have visual challenges with reading and writing stuff, I would recommend that you give them a piece of paper that they can underline the keywords, right? So if you're using a book, you might not want to write in the book, so maybe you can make a copy of that. But if they underline the keywords as they think them and choose them, then they can transfer the underlined keywords into the outline and do that one sentence at a time, and that seems to help. With older kids, or once you've been doing this a while, you may not need to underline them, but it's always available as an option. So there we see fell, comma, well, comma, and escape crossed out. I recommend that you separate the keywords with commas. That way, when you go to reconstruct the idea, comma kind of tells your brain, oh, there's some words that need to go in between here to make this into a sentence that's going to work again. All right, next sentence. A goat passed by and asked the fox, what are you doing down there? Okay, keywords. Goat. For G, you could use a G for goat. So you know how we can use symbols, numbers, or abbreviations for free. So we can put G. We know we're going to have a goat. So then you have, what else? Passed, asked, what? Okay, past, asked, or what? That would work. I think maybe this example is using doing, right? So G, past, asked, doing. So there's no right or wrong answers here. And this sometimes irritates people because we all came through an education system where we want to always know the right answer, right? Especially if you're one of those kids who always wanted to get an A on everything, and so you always want the right answer. But there's lots of ways to do keyword outlines. So there's, some words might work better than others, but there's no absolute way to do any one of them. It's kind of the fact that you learn better how to do it by doing it, and you can make better choices. But all right, next one. Oh, have you not heard? Said the fox. All right, keywords. Not heard? Yeah, you may not even need 3 words. There's no rule that says you have to have 3 words. If you only need 2 or even 1, that's all right as well. Let's see what we've got here. All right, so F for fox, and then we can use the quotations you and not heard. Have you not heard? Then the next sentence is a little bit longer. There's going to be a great drought, so I came down here in order to be sure to have water by me. Keywords? Drought. I would definitely choose that because it's hard to spell, and if you copy a hard to spell word into your outline, then you won't have to figure out how to spell it later on. Down. Water. Okay, so that'll probably work. What do we have? Drought. Okay, down gets to be an arrow. And water, if you know it, you could put the chemical formula to save yourself, I suppose, a little bit of effort. I know some boys who would do anything to save themselves the effort of writing extra letters. So there you have it. I would mention, too, that sometimes you get a long sentence, and someone may say, oh, this is a long sentence. Couldn't I please have 4 keywords? Well, then someone else would say, well, this is as long as that, and if I don't have 5, I probably won't remember it. Someone else would then be, well, if she could have 5, I'm sure I could have 6, and someone else would be, well, 6, 7, what's the difference? So what would be happening? Pretty soon you'd be copying whole sentences or huge chunks of them, and the essence of the keywordness of the activity would be lost. So we are strict in this Unit 1-2, in the beginning of our system, very strict about 3 keywords per sentence, no exceptions. Just live with it. I will say, if I'm introducing the whole idea at a high school level, I might start with 4, just because the sentences tend to be a little bit longer, and so you might have seen me do that in a class at some point. But in 3 or 4, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that you have a limit and you stick to it, and that teaches the discipline you will need. Okay, next sentence. Why don't you come down too? That's an easy one. What do you like? You too? All right. The goat thought this a good idea and jumped into the well. Keywords? You could use goat, or you can just use a G. The G is free because the symbols, numbers, and abbreviations are free. Idea. Jumped. Maybe good idea. Good idea, jumped. Let's see what we got here. Thought, idea, down, well. Yeah. I really don't like PowerPoint because it's very hard to put on the screen what you say. I am old enough to remember overhead projectors. Is there anyone else of my generation? Those were nice because you could actually put it there, and with a little pen, you could write down exactly what people say. Now, basically impossible. You have to mind read your audience, I suppose. So I don't really like the format because it implies that, oh, that's the correct way. Again, there's no absolutely correct way, and we could have easily written other words that you chose. So, all right. The fox immediately sprang onto the goat's back, and by putting a foot on the goat's long horns, managed to hop up to the edge of the well. Keywords, that's a little bit longer of a sentence. Kind of get the picture what's happening here. Fox immediately sprang onto the goat's back, and by putting a foot on the goat's long horns, managed to hop up to the edge of the well. Keywords? Back, hop, edge.
F, climb, G, out well.
Yeah, now that's interesting because if someone wrote F, climb, G, out well, climb was not in the original. So that's kind of a step further where someone's saying, oh, this hopping and jumping and getting on top of the fox to the edge of the well, that's like climbing. Is that okay? To kind of use a word that makes more sense to you or combines meaning of words than you wrote? Sure, yeah. It helps you remember that the fox used the goat to get out of the well. At this point, too, there's going to be some kid in the class who says, hold on a minute. This said the fox fell into a deep well. But he's just going down on top of this goat and then getting up to the edge. That's not a deep well. A deep well is hundreds of feet deep. Okay, fine. It's an Aesop fable. It's like a superhero movie. You just suspend reality for a while and you're happy. All right. All right, last one. Remember, said the fox, be careful of the advice of one who is in trouble. Don't say anything. Just write down what you think now. You've got the hang of it. Choose 3 key words and put those into your outline and we'll see what you got. What did you choose?
Careful, advice, and trouble.
Careful, advice, trouble. Did anyone else get those same three? Careful, advice, trouble? Okay, very nice. Someone get something different. What did you get?
I got that, but I put a number 1.
A number 1. What's the 1 for?
Like the one who.
Oh, careful of the vice of one who is in trouble. Okay, I got it. I had a daughter who used to always put the number 4 for the word F-O-R. Oh, that just... I had to just let it go. Okay, if it works for you, sweetie. Good. Anyone else get something different than either of those? Yes?
I did the 1 and then a sideways arrow to trouble.
Oh, sideways arrow, to trouble. Oh, you're an experienced keyword outline maker, I can tell. Yeah?
I do like on advice and even on escape at the top. I do like the no smoking sign because it's like no.
No, don't take the advice. No advice. Okay, good. All right, so there are lots of ways to do that. And again, I think it's fine to just let kids wrestle with this a little bit, and we will test it to be sure it works. So it's better to do it that way than to tell them, no, you shouldn't have chose that word, you should chose this other one, because you want them to build confidence in their own choices. All right, so there we have then just the keyword outline. So we're kind of removing or ignoring the original. And what's the next step? Retell it verbally. So let's just pick on our charming front row here. And if you could start us out. What's your name?
Sure, Maggie.
Maggie. So Maggie, if you could start us out and say a sentence that kind of approximates the original with the use of those keywords, fell well, no escape.
Okay. There once was a fox who unluckily fell into a deep well from which there was no escape.
There once was a fox who unluckily fell into a deep well from which there was no escape. Was hers exactly like the original? No. Pretty darn close, but not exactly. Do I care? No. Did she say it in a complete sentence? Yes. Do I care? Yes. We want complete sentence. And if I get a student who, for some reason, cannot do that, make it into a complete sentence, and it's usually a second language or some kind of language challenge reason. Most kids that I meet, as soon as they're able to read and copy words like this, they generally will speak in complete sentences. So it's not hard to get kids to get to that point. But if I do find one who can't do that, I will just take it to the next step. Dictate one, repeat back. Dictate, repeat back. Dictate, repeat back. And just model it very, very tightly until they get the hang of it. So, okay, you've had a chance now to plan and prepare. G, pass, ask, doing.
The goat passed by and asked the fox, "What are you doing?"
The goat passed by and asked the fox, "What are you doing?" All right, next one.
The fox, who desperately tried to find a way out, asked, "Have you not heard?"
The fox, who desperately tried to find a way out, asked, "Have you not heard?" Continue.
There's going to be a drought, so I'm here to be close by the water.
There's going to be a drought, so I am here to be close by the water. I'm down here to be close by the water. I think that's what you said. Good, excellent. Okay, next one.
You want to come down too?
You want to come down too? Oh, these foxes. And I tell you, as soon as that fox gets out of that well, he's going to go kill something. He's going to find a chicken to murder. That's what's going to happen. All right, next one.
The goat thought it was a good idea, so he jumped into the well.
The goat thought it was a good idea, so he jumped into the well. All right, next one.
The fox went on the back of the... Oh, man.
You can look at your own paper.
Okay. The fox jumped on the goat's back and put a foot on the goat's long horns and managed to get out of the well.
The fox jumped on the goat's back and put a foot on the goat's horns and managed to get out of the well. I think that's what you said. All right, excellent, good. And last one, you're going to have to look at your own paper for this.
The fox said, be careful of the advice which could lead to trouble.
All right, the fox said, be careful of the advice which could lead to trouble. Good, okay, so we accomplished it. Now, it didn't happen, but it might have happened that someone I called on, you kind of looked at your paper and thought, I have no idea. I cannot remember why I wrote these keywords. Is it okay to go back, read the original again, maybe even change the outline, and then continue the process? Yes, this is not a test of the children, not a test of the student. It's you, or the student, testing the outline to be sure it works. Although, you have to be a little bit careful. I had one boy once, he had written 3 words and crossed them out and written 3 more words on every line. And at first I thought, oh, he's being very careful about testing his keywords to be sure they're going to work for him. And then I watched him. He copied 6 words and then crossed out 3, and he could still read the crossed out ones. So he was stomping all over my system. But, you know, you got to give a nod to that type of ingenuity, I suppose. All right, so now, if I said, everyone please take out a fresh piece of paper and write a version of the fox and the goat, I think everyone could do that. Nobody would be stuck, right? Now, there would kind of be 3 styles, depending on you and your personality. On one style, probably the men, would be to write this thing in as few words as possible, right? Just make those keywords into sentences and just get done with it. Would that be okay? Yeah, sure. I have no problem with that. It's actually a good skill called being concise, right? Some of you, because of some odd sense of integrity, you would feel compelled to make yours as close to the original as possible. Is that okay? Yeah, sure. It doesn't bother me. I'm not worried about plagiarism of Aesop fables, right? And then some of you would look at it as an opportunity to be a little creative, and you might elaborate and talk about how, you know, the fox woke up that morning and climbed onto the edge of the well and decided to practice his new ballet technique, and then a poof of wind caused him to lose his balance, at which point he tumbled into the well, making a great splash, and out came the water, which attracted the goat. And you're going to give me half a page just to get the fox into the well. Is that okay? Yeah, sure. I don't care. All of it's good. But what I know I won't have is the problem of anyone saying, I don't know what to write, I don't know what to do, I can't think of anything, right? And that allows me to now get about the business of teaching you how to do it better. So now we move into, and you can flip your paper over, we can talk about the idea of introducing stylistic techniques. So our system is called structure and style. And this type of structure here, with a keyword outline, taking keywords from each sentence, is what we teach in Unit 1 and 2 of our whole system of 9 units and extensions there. And then the stylistic techniques, we have several categories, the first of which is dress up. And this, I think, fits well because if we make for children the comparison of style and clothing and dressing differently, we can dress for different purposes. We can also use words and write for different purposes. So if you have your play clothes, jeans and t-shirt, then that's just a simple style, and that's good for play clothes. If you were going to a costume party, you could dress weirdly, and you could look wild and crazy, and that would be okay too. Although we usually think of dress up as maybe improving your style a bit, going to an important thing, a wedding, Easter, put on your nice dress and new shoes, or in my case, I would wear a suit and a tie to look more professional. So that idea that in writing, we can do that. We can have jeans and t-shirt, we can have wild and crazy, we could have a little more professional. So that idea of dress up makes sense to kids. And with our techniques of dress-ups, you can take a look and see on the other page, we have 6 of these things. And the most important thing for you to get right at the moment is don't make your students do all these dress-ups, all 6 of them, the first time you try, right? That's the opposite of our approach, which we call easy plus 1, meaning introduce one technique, require that in each thing they write until it is easy. What does easy mean? You can do it without much help, and it doesn't sound too goofy most of the time. So you do that one technique until it's easy, then and only then do you add the next technique. So now you've got the ly and maybe the who which clause, and you do both of those things in each composition or each paragraph of each composition until it is easy. Then and only then do you introduce the third thing, and then you do all 3 of those things until it is easy, and then the fourth until it's easy, and you only introduce a new style technique when what has been learned so far has become easy. So if you do this correctly, right, then at any given moment, you're just dealing with what's easy plus one new challenge. And if you get into this and you start to hear students say like, this is too hard, do I have to do everything on the checklist? What they're actually saying to you is, well, you taught me too much too quickly, and this is not easy. At which point you want to back up, cross a few things off, and go back to what's easy and camp out there for a while. So, however you make your checklists, and if you're dealing with a group of children, or if you're using one of our printed materials that have printed in checklists, you want to be in charge of the checklist. Don't let it be in charge of you. And if you need to cross something off to make it easy, then that's okay. So one of the things that we like to do is we like to kind of preview the style techniques to be sure that we have some good kind of options in the ear and in the mind, on the board, so that the words they choose are likely to fit and make sense in the story they're writing. So in this case, we have the story of the fox and the goat, and so we would look and see, okay, a fox fell into a well. How did the fox fall? The fox somethingly fell into the well. What word could you maybe come up with that would work? Clumsily. Carelessly. Say again? Foolishly. Innocently. Come on, use your brain. Don't look on the screen. What else? The fox somethingly fell in the well. Accidentally, suddenly. Now what I'm doing is I'm writing all your words on my whiteboard, right? Okay, what's the next thing that happened? The goat passed and asked, what are you doing? The goat somethingly said, what are you doing? How did the goat say that? Curiously. Innocently. Rudely. Say again. Politely. Say again. Curiously. Okay, so I got a few more. All right, what happened next? The fox said, oh, there's going to be a drought. How did the fox say that? Slyly. Cleverly. Deceitfully. Suspiciously. Oh, facetiously. Ooh, that's a good one. Now, here's one thing I really like about doing this with a group of children. In fact, I much prefer to teach writing in a small group than one-on-one. Because in a small group, you can get from kids all sorts of words. So maybe you've got a hotshot little girl who says facetiously because she just learned it in, the book she was reading and remembers it. And then you've got another child who would never use that word, right? And so what happens is you get lots of words up and you have a nice list of ly adverbs. You can do this also with strong verbs, quality adjectives, any vocabulary in general. You can get ideas up on the whiteboard, And it's kind of like the Robin Hood style of teaching, right? You steal from the rich, you give to the poor, but everybody wins. Everybody has access to better vocabulary than any one of us could think all by ourselves. And so this idea of teaching writing in a small group, getting lots of words onto the board, and then once you got them on the board, move them onto a poster. And once you've got your walls covered with posters of words, you may need your wall space back, at which point you could put them on a piece of paper and let everyone have their nice collection of, 100 or maybe more ly adverbs that you have come up with in the process of going through keyword outlines and figuring out which ones would work. So that's kind of a preview of the way we would teach the stylistic techniques to children as you get into this list. And so the ly adverb is the first one. I usually teach this first because it is the easiest grammatically to use. An ly adverb has the ability to kind of hop around inside a sentence, and it can go many different places, and it still works. It's not quite as limiting. You'll also notice then, if you look at the list, we alternate between vocabulary and grammatical structures. So the next technique is a who or which clause. Technically, this would create an adjective clause because it tells more about a thing, but you don't have to know that. You just have to know that you use the word who or which to tell more information or connect up ideas. And this is a case where you would probably go through the outline, make a few examples of how you could construct a who or which clause as you are doing it. The next one is strong verb. And to do the strong verb and as well as the quality adjective, what we will do is often introduce the banned words idea. So in this story, if you were ready to add in the strong verb idea, then you would probably go for the verb said and look for all the possible substitutes for said, get those on the board, get those on the wall, get those in the notebook, and build kind of a thesaurus for your kind of weak, lame, lousy verbs, your not so quality adjectives like good, bad, big, cool, and find all the substitutes. And the goal isn't to say to the children, you may never ever write the word said again, because sometimes it is the right word. But what you do want to do is sensitize them to options. So, is this the best word for this particular use? And hopefully then you can equip them with some tools that will help them find words. A thesaurus used to be a book, but now most people have some kind of electronic device or access, word finder, whatever. We have a marvelous little product called a Word Right Now that is especially organized by parts of speech. So you can go to a character quality, such as courage, and then you can find ly adverbs, courageously, boldly, fearlessly, and get a nice long list of substitutes or options for ly. And then also we have that for quality adjective, and we have it for strong verb. And it's a super handy little book. We also, just to keep up with the times, made the whole book into an app. So you can go to IEW Writing Tools is our app, and there's a free version that doesn't have all those words, and then of course there's in-app purchase. So you see then we have the strong verb because clause, and then the quality adjective, and then the www.asia stands for when, while, where, as, since, if, although. And so we would then gradually over time build a checklist that would allow the student to do, at some point, all 6 of these dress-ups in each paragraph of each composition. And if you've introduced them slowly, the way you're supposed to, doing all 6 should be easy. But that will take weeks or months or years, depending on the age and aptitude of the children. Now, one thing that I would like to suggest for you, particularly when you are dealing with reluctant writers, but I think it's true and works for everybody, is a few rules. And the rule that I tell the students whenever they're in a class that I am teaching is no erasing is allowed on the rough draft, on the first copy. No erasing allowed. Why? Have you ever watched a child write an entire sentence and then decide they don't like it and spend 5 times as long erasing it as it took to write it? Erasing is a horrific waste of time. So I don't want that. Also, what happens is I've seen these kids, you can spot them, they will erase 2 words so they can then squeeze in the 3 that are supposed to be there so that they won't have to write it over again. Okay, no, we don't want this business of first and only draft, right? So if you say no erasing allowed, then it removes that temptation. And then there's a freedom that comes. Write something, you don't like it, just cross it out and keep going. Some newer research shows that there's actually a change of brain activity when you flip a pencil upside down to erase. You can look at fMRI scans and you can see when you're writing, you're kind of in this language part of your brain. When you flip the pencil upside down, that all disappears, and then you're in the erase it, brush off the eraser droppings, turn it right side back up, and then you have to reformulate the whole train of thought that you had. And for us, we can do that relatively easily, but for children, sometimes that's very frustrating to lose what was the next word I was going to say here and have to go reconstruct the thing from scratch again. So I would actually strongly recommend that you encourage children to use pen instead of pencil. Why? Well, pencils have lots of problems. Number one, they are erasable. Pens, unless you have one of those heretical devices called an erasable pen, which should not exist, but pens you can't erase, so the temptation is removed. But there are other problems with pencils. Pencils are tactilely, neurologically, and emotionally disturbing to children, and I can prove it. Have you ever noticed that a child has a compelling need to frequently sharpen their pencils? Now, you think it's because they want to get out of their chair and move around a little bit. Not true. Give them a pen, they'll sit there for an hour, right? The reason is this. Pencils are constantly changing, right? When you start writing with a pencil, it gives you one level of friction, one tactile kinesthetic experience. 2 minutes later, the pencil is duller, so the tactile kinesthetic feeling is different. 2 minutes later, it's duller, right? So it's different. And 2 minutes later, it's so different from what the child started with. What do children crave more than almost anything else? Consistency. And so that's why they want to keep sharpening the pencil. Another problem with pencils is they contribute to tired hand disease. Have you ever seen a child who writes a sentence and says, "Oh, I'm so exhausted, I can't possibly write another sentence. My hand is so tired." Well, part of that's just a lack of stamina. But what's interesting is that children who get tired hand disease very often also have a visual immaturity. You might call them mildly dyslexic. I would call them just not cooked yet, right? They're going to be fine. But they don't see things as clearly and easily. And what they want to see is a darker image. That is why when they're using a pencil, pencils aren't black, they are gray. And to make it darker, you have to push harder, which not only causes tired hand disease, it causes them to break the tip of that darn pencil, and now I have to go sharpen it again. So if you're completely married to the idea of pencils, for kids like that, the optimal type of pencil would be a thick, soft lead mechanical pencil, which is consistent in the tip it gives you and it will give a darker line without more pressure. But I'm suggesting just get rid of pencils, save them for math or whatever, and go to pen, right? Because it gives you a dark line without you having to put more pressure, and it removes the problem of consistency and the temptation of erasing. You know that whole thing, I don't know if you're old enough, when I was in school, they used to say, rough draft in pencil, final in pen. Should be the exact opposite. Rough draft in pen, so you don't waste any time erasing, and then, if you're not going to type the final, then copy it over in pencil, so if you make a transcription error, you can fix it and not have it be messy or have to rewrite the thing a third time, which nobody would do. I do recommend that you try to keep kids writing the first draft on paper for as long as possible, right? Now, you will at some point lose the battle, right? When they're 12, 13, 14, they're just going to be like, why do I have to write on paper? Why can't I just type it like the rest of the normal people in the world, right? But if you can keep them writing on paper for as long as possible, they will develop the skill of writing on paper, which I think is a valuable skill. I would not want to not have that skill, would you? And if you let an 8-year-old start typing everything and let them do it their whole childhood, they could easily become an adult who can't really write on paper very much. So and then there's also some very interesting brain research that shows that when we write on paper, we're using more of our brain than when we're typing. And the area of the brain that we are using more of is in the artistic intuitive subdominant hemisphere of the cortex. So it is possible that you actually get better thinking or more artistic writing if you write on paper as opposed to just typing. So there are a lot of reasons for that, and I actually have a talk called Paper and Pen, What the Research Says, that I think is available, and if you want to access that research and think about it a little more, you certainly can. All right, so there's the summary of what we have gone through. You're going to use source text at or below the reading level. You want to try as much as possible to make the source text interesting. I think Aesop fables because they have a little narrative line. If you're using animals, try to use weird ones that kids, especially boys, something ugly, dangerous, or violent is always helpful. But you want the source text to be interesting. Remember the rules for the keyword outline, maximum of 3 per sentence. Separate the, don't forget the telling it back verbally before having the children write it out in prose, and then eliminate the idea of the first and only draft. It's okay to cross out, it's okay to make a mess. I recommend pens over pencil, and separate the complexity, and then as that has become familiar, then you can start adding in the dress-ups one at a time as they become easy. I also have a talk called The 4 Deadly Errors of Teaching Writing that I think would be very useful for anyone undertaking this, or really anyone teaching writing at all. And in case you're curious, the 4 deadly errors are overcorrection, withholding help, unclear assignments, and over-expectation. So you can read a summary of that on our website, IEW.com. You can listen to that also, I think, on our website. All right, so that's essentially what we have, and I don't know that we have 100% success rate, but I know for a fact we're in the high 90% of reluctant writers who got into this hating the idea of writing, and then through the process of learning to separate complexity, work with keyword outlines, learning how to represent, and then gradually moving into presenting their own ideas, that you will see a transformed kid. And I certainly have met many who will tell me themselves, I used to hate it, and now it's my favorite subject. So it is possible to see good effects even with your most reluctant writers.